Man, there are people getting slaughtered in Mexico, right? And I get it. The cartels are bad people, but it's not just cartel people getting killed. It's Mexican cops. It's Mexican civilians. So, I mean, any opportunity that you have to stop that carnage, you should stop that carnage. And that's why I was so really upset back in the day, 2010, 2011, 2007 on, actually, because I was fighting with U.S. Attorney's Office for years.
The opinions of the guests and host are their own and do not represent the opinions of Ironclad, the Border Patrol, or the Department of Homeland Security.
Welcome to Borderland Narcosis, an Ironclad original presented by First Form. Go check out your products at firstform.com/borderland. Yes, and our next guest is Pete Forcelli. He was on before. He's a retired ATF agent. He was a whistleblower during the Fast and Furious. He comes back to talk to us about Project Thor, something that we think is very interesting here, and we're going to keep digging. So you guys check it out. All right, Pete, man, it's good to have you back on Borderland. Now you're on the series of Narcosis, which obviously we focus a little bit more on the cartel, drugs, and guns. And so I thought, why not have Pete back on here and let's talk about some things.
It's good to be here, brother. Good to see you again.
Absolutely. So the first time we talked a lot about Fast and Furious, but this time, you know, we're going to kind of pivot into something else that's kind of a concern or a thought of ours. If you wouldn't mind, for the audience, can you give a kind of a brief bio of your background and kind of how you were involved with the whole Fast and Furious side of things, and we'll continue from there.
Sure, man. I was with the NYPD for 15 years. I was walked the beat, did plainclothes patrol for a while, became a detective, worked a lot with the feds, ATF, FBI, DEA, a lot with ATF and DEA. Jumped ship after 15 years, became an ATF agent, worked in New York for 6 years, made the mistake of promoting, went out to Phoenix, was out there. My folks were doing some good stuff, seizing a bunch of guns that were heading into the hands of cartel folks. U.S. Attorney's Office wasn't prosecuting a lot of those cases. When that whole Fast and Furious mess happened, I wasn't involved in that case. Neither were any of my people, but I stood up because U.S. Attorney's Office was dropping the ball. They helped pave the path to Operation Fast and Furious. So after, testifying in front of Congress, blowing the whistle back in 2011, got thrown out of the state of Arizona, bounced around, went up to Canada for a couple of years, helped the Canadian police as a liaison, headquarters, where I was in charge of leadership development for a bit. I was the head of the ATF Miami office during Parkland, Pulse, and the Fort Lauderdale Airport mass shootings. Then they got tired of bad stuff happening in Florida, so they bounced me out of Florida back up to headquarters, and I rounded out my last 4 years, originally in charge of all operations on the East Coast, but finally, towards the end as the head of training for ATF, which was kind of cool because, going down the academy, seeing the fresh new faces, dealing with other agencies was invigorating. So yeah, and then I retired in October of 2021. And since then, I speak freely about stuff that people need to hear about.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, welcome back. Thank you for taking the time with us.
Sure.
So the big thing we have questions about, and again, whatever I would love to hear it, is if you could walk us through this Project Thor. So first, what was Project Thor for the audience?
Project Thor was a program where ATF and other agencies were using the whole of government approach to try to stem the flow of firearms to the cartels in Mexico. Like the big problem, like what I talked about in Phoenix, was the U.S. Attorney's Office. They weren't prosecuting people bringing guns to Mexico. So, what the Mexican cartels do is they rely on networks, straw purchasing networks that buy guns a little bit here, a little bit there, right? So like, for example, let's say that you're a straw purchaser, you're down on your luck, you need some money. I might offer you a couple $100 to go buy an AK variant rifle, right? That, so have you, maybe 5 or 6 other straw purchasers, have you buy them for a little while. Then I'm going to walk away from you. Right. And develop a whole new network, because by that time, maybe some of the guns you bought are going to start getting traced in Mexico. Right. So because these traffickers, what they do is they get, like I said, straw purchasers buy the guns for them. Then they smuggle them into Mexico. Because what a lot of people don't realize is Mexican aduana does not really check the cars going southbound like CBP does stuff coming north. Like we do a pretty good job of screening stuff coming into the United States. Aduana doesn't. They especially don't when the plaza boss tells the aduana folks, hey, man, better not check these cars. So, I mean, there's a lot of corruption in Mexico, as you know. So it's not hard to smuggle firearms purchased in the United States into Mexico. So like the same scenarios that we saw in Arizona, where we identified these networks, we were trying to get them prosecuted, they're now happening all over the United States because the cartels have a footprint in every state, including Alaska, including Maine. So when they need guns, they're telling people up here, hey, buy the guns. The straw purchasers who have clean records, right? Because they're regular people. They got driver's licenses, no criminal histories. They can go in, they could pass the background check. But when they go in to buy that gun, they go in knowing that they're not buying it for themselves. They know they're going to hand that gun off to a trafficker or some cartel, straw purchase cell network handler. And then those guns make their way south. Now, the big difference between Fast and Furious and what was going on with this Project Thor was Fast and Furious started, the agents involved in that case were not communicating with Mexico. They were not communicating with the ATF people in Mexico. They weren't really communicating with other law enforcement. Their intentions were to let the guns go to Mexico. With Thor, they were actually working with DEA, special operations, getting intelligence about, who was operating in the United States through phone records. They were working with Homeland Security investigations, postal inspectors. It was a whole of government approach in which they were trying to interdict firearms before they made their way into Mexico to identify these networks and to prosecute them. Look, in some parts of the country, prosecution is the challenge, and then there are other parts, it's, staffing, all kinds of things. I mean, you were in the law enforcement world, how it goes.
Yeah. So that's interesting. It sounds like Project Thor was actually extremely successful. And from what I was reading is that there's nowhere to find anything that says it wasn't working. Is that correct?
Correct. My understanding is it was good. They were building cases. They were doing what cops and agents are supposed to do. They were following the evidence, following the information, flipping people, getting people prosecuted. And then in roughly 2021, things changed. Now, here's the weird thing. The agents that were running that program, it was kind of like an OSTEF case where they were getting funding to run the program because, it's not cheap to do these interagency operations. It was briefed all the way up to the National Security Council and some people very, very high up in DOJ. But then in 2021, they decided to go in another direction and they shut it down. But it's weird because I've spoken to people that were involved in it on the Mexico side and on the U.S. side. And look, that's the important thing. Remember, Fast and Furious, they weren't talking to the Mexican government, those agents, and they weren't talking to the ATF folks in Mexico. Here, this was happening. And my understanding is the ambassador to Mexico at the time when it started was a guy named Landau. And he was like psyched about it. My understanding is he really liked it. He was enthusiastic about the project. Then Biden brought in Salazar to replace Landau. And Salazar took a completely different approach. Now, the scary thing to me, Vince, is, and you know this because I say it like it is, at least the way what I see, what I observe, is around the same time where this thing starts to fall apart, the government of Mexico starts to sue the U.S. gun industry and some gun dealers in the state of Arizona. And the crazy thing is the gun dealers they're suing, many of them were the same people that ATF agents that were working on Fast and Furious told to sell guns to straw purchasers, even when the dealers were like, hey, man, we don't want to sell guns to these people anymore. So it's just weird how around the time that this lawsuit stems and they're suing U.S. gun industry, and that includes like Smith & Wesson, some manufacturers, and they're suing some dealers in the state of Arizona, all of a sudden Salazar and others don't like this whole concept. And then somehow it gets defunded. My understanding is it got defunded outside of ATF, but I've heard within ATF, I've heard DOJ. But I mean, look, they all answer to the administration. And as you know, the ambassador is a presidentially appointed member of the administration.
Yeah, I find it fascinating, man. So for the audience, Fast and Furious wasn't this big sanctioned, multi agency operation. It was kind of an internal operation that kind of did it out within itself. This one was kind of multiple different agencies involved across Mexico, good communication, everyone's in support of it, and it's proven to be successful. And then a couple years later, completely gets defunded, which that's what I was like, that's crazy to hear that something as successful as it's supported. The Project Thor supported 76 cartel trafficking cases and identified most of the major, CJNG weapons trafficking networks. And so in those few years, I think it was 2 years, right? It was extremely successful. And then out of nowhere, it gets defunded.
Correct.
And that to me just doesn't sound right. It sounds Obviously, it sounds some kind of tomfoolery.
Well, I mean, and like I said, I mean, it gets defunded around the same time where this newly appointed ambassador Salazar starts to protest some of the things going on down there. And around the same time that the government of Mexico sues these manufacturers and dealers in the United States, which kind of blew my mind that they can do that. I mean, look, these people are engaged in lawful business. And I could tell you, going back to, I know you're familiar with my book, the dealers were sources of information for us. I mean, when they saw something suspicious, they called us. They were good members of the community. They cared about public safety. So, you know, I mean, that whole thing was a complete mess and people should have been held to account. But here, when everybody's doing it right, all of a sudden they put the pause to it, and the timing of it, like to coincide with that lawsuit, is too coincidental for me to believe there wasn't some sort of coordination. And I'll go one step further. You know, obviously Joe Biden had the Office of Gun Violence Prevention, which was an office within the White House. Some of the same people who staffed that very office were people from every town and these anti-Second Amendment organizations who were supporting the lawsuit. So, I mean, when you look at those things, and I mean, you could look this up. This is open source information available on Google. Like Rob Wilcox, a former big shot from every town, was one of the big shots in the Office of Gun Violence Prevention. Those connections are disturbing to me. Now, you know, how involved they were in maybe changing policy is something that I don't know, but it's hard for me to believe that they had no role in, you know, having conversations with Salazar or talking to people who are participating in this lawsuit, because there are U.S. Attorneys, not United States attorneys like the federal prosecutor types, but lawyers from within the United States that are assisting the government of Mexico in that lawsuit.
You know, something that I thought was crazy, and I totally agree with you. It just sounds completely bonkers. But one of the crazy things in the notes here, it says Senator Grassley said that the senior DOJ officials claim that they've never heard of the Project Thor. Is that true? Did you hear that same rumor?
I heard that rumor. Look, and for to be completely upfront and transparent with you, you know, a lot of the investigators that worked for Senator Grassley's office during Fast and Furious have left. They've gone out to, you know, do other things. So when Senator Grassley started investigating this, I was retired for a little bit over a year, and they reached out and said, hey, would you mind coming here and explaining how these things work, what happened during Fast and Furious, how ATF handles straw purchasing cases and, you know, prosecutions and whatnot. So I met with them. I've met with them several times because I think that the American taxpayer deserves transparency. So, I mean, where their investigation is going to go, I can't say because I don't know. You know, they don't tell me. I'm just there. But I was honest with them about what I did know about how ATF handles these sorts of cases and about what happened back in those dark days of Operation Fast and Furious. So I know they're still aggressively investigating what happened with Project Thor and why the funding stopped.
How is your relationship with the ATF now? Do people get upset that you were a whistleblower on them?
You know, it's weird. There were people that were on that some were. Most of the people that are there now were good with it, man. Like what happened in that case went against the grain of everything that we believed in, man. Like there were a lot of people that were offended by Operation Fast and Furious. I think deeply offended. But I mean, it's strange because like Dettelbach, the last ATF director, was kind of left of center, somewhat anti-gun. And I was very critical of his policies and, you know, I don't know the man personally, so I was vocal about that. So I don't think he was thrilled, but there were a lot of people who were under his chain of command who would reach out to me and say, hey man, thanks for speaking up. Because most agents they just want to go after violent people who misuse guns. It's not about the gun. It's not about, infringing on people's rights. It's about going after people who are using guns to commit robberies or gang shootings. I mean, that's the stuff that I was passionate about. And yeah, are there a couple knuckleheads thrown in the mix? Sure. But yeah, for the most part, people have been supportive and appreciative of people like you too, that want to get the truth out, you know, because I mean, if you listen to the news, you don't hear the truth. You hear talking points, you know? So,
yeah, I mean, we'll talk on that for a second, because the crazy thing about the ATF does not have a good public presence on social media. Actually, the social media makes it look like they just come and just take your guns to outstanding citizens. Yeah. And that's what the social media kind of conversation is. They catch a lot of hate from gun guys, like crazy amount of hate. And then on the other side, I have friends who are in ATF. I have real ATF buddies who are, they're apprehending these criminal organizations that have gun violence, and then they can't get someone to prosecute them. Yeah. So it's like, I know that side of the story. And then the media and social media makes ATF look like kind of a bunch of jokers. And it's unfortunate that this is what happens to all of our, I mean, I see it with the Border Patrol. It's exactly what happens with the Border Patrol. They get completely talked down to on social media. And then the truth is, like, what an incredible job it is. And so it's really interesting to hear some of these stories. And this is why, you know, Project Thor is a fascinating one, because it sounds like an initiative that's actually working, that's actually stopping guns, that's actually, you know, doing things, especially in a time right now when the heavy cartel violence in Mexico is through the roof. And what are they using? Well, American guns, you know what I mean? And so we have really nothing like this currently in place that is slowing down the trafficking of firearms. But then you have a Project Thor who gets shut down after 2 years. It was highly successful. And then there's no word of why. There's no information that explains why the funding was dropped and who dropped it and why. Right. And that's why I just think this kind of stuff just drives me freaking nuts.
Well, I mean, let's go a little further than that. I mean, you were in law enforcement and you get it. So, look, everybody thinks that the feds come and crap on the local cops, right? But you know this, brother. There's a lot of infighting within the federal government. Where, like, when I worked in New York, got along really good with the FBI, worked with the DEA all the time. When I got to Arizona, we hated the FBI. They hated us. I mean, I wouldn't have been surprised if bodies were left in the desert. I mean, from each other. We got along with HSI, for example, in Phoenix really well. The people in Yuma despised us. So, I mean, to get all of these agencies to play together in the sandbox is an accomplishment. And my understanding in Project Thor, that was happening. So, I mean, you know, you talk about whole of government approach. It doesn't happen very often. It's happening right now with the immigration stuff because Tom Homan is, you know, putting the pressure on and the administration wants that. But, man, you know, there was a lot of turf battles and people fighting for territory and organizational pride and ego that got in the way. So, yeah, the funding getting pulled, especially when you had all these organizations working together and cooperating, is something that perplexes me. But again, hearing that Salazar was not thrilled with ATF and not thrilled with some of the cases going on and the timing and the Mexico lawsuit really makes it look like it was political and probably came from a little higher up than folks suspect than just some person in headquarters deciding we're not going to fund it. You know, that to me is the troubling part.
Well, let me ask, from just that statement alone, what does the government get out of defunding something that is successful? I don't understand what the, I don't know, idea behind that would assist the government in anything. I just don't get why they would even do that.
No, I agree. But I mean, let's go back to Fast and Furious, right? Like, the reason I spoke up was because my agents weren't allowed to do their job. They weren't allowed to, when they'd have confessions, when they'd seize guns, going to cartels, mind you, no prosecutions were happening. I mean, that's what I wrote my book about, because the U.S. Attorney's Office in Arizona were architects of Operation Fast and Furious with ATF. I'm not trying to say ATF didn't deserve the blame. They deserve what they got. But, you know, and then you look at with Thor, man, there are people getting slaughtered in Mexico, right? And I get it. The cartels are bad people, but it's not just cartel people getting killed. It's Mexican cops. It's Mexican civilians. So, yes. I mean, any opportunity that you have to stop that carnage, you should stop that carnage. And that's why I was so really upset back in the day, 2010, 2011, 2007 on, actually, because I was fighting with U.S. Attorney's Office for years. But here they're actually making inroads where they're actually seizing guns. They're identifying these networks. To stop doing that while the carnage is still going on makes absolutely no sense to me. Not even just as a law enforcement officer, as a human being. Because Mexicans are people, man. You know, the cartels, yeah, they're bad people. But the people that are living there, you know, down there trying to raise families, trying to live their lives, man, they're getting hit by these bullets too. So it's unconscionable. So I don't know why. And I hope Senator Grassley and his people get to the bottom of it. And I hope the taxpayers find out exactly what's going on, you know?
Let me ask this, because of the new administration involved, you know, it's going to be more pro law enforcement, right? We all know it feels better. It feels like, you know, we're the law enforcement community is able to do their job per se. But there's rumors that the ATF might get, I mean, there's millions of rumors of what's going on with the ATF, right? What's going to end up happening in the future, whether they get disbanded, which I don't think it will ever happen, but that's part of the conversation. Whether they'll get put into HSI, they'll get split into this or that. Just from your experience in all the years, what do you think is going to happen with the ATF?
Well, right now, they don't have a nominated director. They don't even have to confirm. They don't even want to nominate yet. The thing I'll say is the guy who's the deputy director right now is a guy named Bob Cicada. He was an NYPD cop. He's pro-Second Amendment. He's about as straight a shooter as you come. If the president was smart, and I'm not saying he's not, he would tap Bobby or keep him there, or maybe even once Bobby's eligible to move up, or bring in somebody who's like-minded, who wants to really put a hurting to the cartels. Because look, his big pressure is to neuter the cartels. You can't neuter them if you're arming them. I mean, let's look back to the CJNG, which you mentioned earlier. They're patrolling parts of Mexico in armored vehicles with military-grade weapons. I mean, they're taking semi-automatic rifles that are sold up here, and they're converting them to machine guns down here. That's something that's happening. In fact, one of our cases when I was in Phoenix was targeting someone who was doing that for the Sinaloa cartel. So, I mean, if you wanted to put a hurting on the cartels, you have to do it from every possible angle. Seizing their money, so using IRS criminal investigations, letting Border Patrol do their job, let HSI do their job. And look, ATF's forte is to work with the gun dealers when we were allowed to do that, and to go after the people who are coming in, straw purchasing firearms, to charge them, to cut off that supply. And again, man, the thing that the public doesn't learn, because the media doesn't tell them, is the dealers liked ATF for the most part. Where there's some problems, absolutely. But they cooperated with us without fail. And that's why like I said, when this whole thing started with the Mexican government suing the gun industry, I started to work with the lawyers defending the gun industry, because I knew that they were good partners to us out there. And I was like, how do you leave a man behind? So to let them sit there and get sued for doing exactly the right thing and for cooperating with us when candidly, to do so put them in peril, would have been the wrong thing to do. You don't leave a man behind. And a lot of those dealers were solid partners. So I hope ATF survives this. But yeah, I've heard the rumors. But look, I'm going to be honest with you. I talk to people on Capitol Hill, and I know that the NRA and a lot of these organizations that outwardly say ATF needs to be banned, quietly behind closed doors want ATF to exist, because they need a boogeyman to keep their dues money coming in to fund their organizations. I mean, the reality is, too, unless the Gun Control Act and the National Firearms Act go away, someone's going to enforce those laws. And a small agency like ATF that's underfunded, understaffed, is probably the one they want doing it. So,
yeah, it's, from the guys I know that are boots on ground working the ATF job in these heavily gang-infested cities, their work is nonstop. And just trying to get someone to prosecute some of these cases is almost impossible. There's kids 15, 16, 17 that can shoot, have 4 or 5 different cases on them and still not get prosecuted because they're juveniles, right? There's a lot of crazy things that are happening in some of these cities, especially I'm talking specifically for Detroit. I know for a fact, but those are some of the issues that I know ATF does, and I think they do it well. And so it's an interesting time right now. We do have a great administration who is completely supportive of the law enforcement space, which has been good. I just haven't seen what decisions they're going to make with the ATF. Just like you said, they don't have an actual director yet. And again, I wish they would do something with their public messaging. I wish they would show communities more of what they do, instead of, allowing their voices to be told, because everything looks bad. And
of course. Well, let's go back in history. Okay. Fast and Furious was a mess, and ATF deserved the kick in the teeth that it got, because those small number of agents did something so insanely stupid. And granted, they did it with the U.S. Attorney's Office. They could have said no. So, I mean, that one they deserve. You look at Ruby Ridge and you look at Waco, right? Here's some things I'll tell you. Ruby Ridge, an ATF agent didn't kill Randy Weaver's wife. That was an FBI sniper who burned the Branch Davidian's compound to the ground. ATF was sitting in their hotel room. They were already thrown off the scene. They were laying in bed, scratching their when they would turn on the TV and see that place is burning. Now, Fast and Furious was a case targeting straw purchasers. Guess who the traffickers were? FBI informants. So, I mean, look, ATF has its problems, but so do all federal agencies, But the problem is when other agencies are told, hey, man, you're not to talk to the media, sit in the corner and stay quiet, ATF does, like a scorned child. Where other agencies are like, yeah, okay, whatever you say. And then they'll go out there and they'll defend their people, or they'll, try to get the story out to tell whatever narrative they want to tell. That's the problem. ATF doesn't stand up for itself. And look, when they make mistakes, they need to own them, and learn from them and move on. But yeah, you're entirely correct.
What's going on, y'all? I'm not sure if you know this, but Borderland Narcosis is sponsored by First Form. First Form is a wellness supplement company. And, I've been with them for about 7 years. And I've been with them for that long because I truly believe in not just the product, but the people who own the company. They are a culture that just believes in your health. And so if you guys haven't tried it before, I would recommend you go and check out the Formula One Cinnamon Toast Crunch. Add a little bit of a ignition to that, and you'll have exactly what you need for your post-workout drink. This is something I've used for a very long time. When I'm in the best shape of my life, it's always been because I have a nice regimen of the First Form products. So if you guys are interested, go check them out at firstform.com/borderland. Okay, use our link. It is the number one stphorm.com/borderland. And if you order over $75, you get free shipping. And if you're new to the site, you get a free app for 30 days. So go check it out. Again, thank you so much for all the support. See you soon. Big picture, long term, what's the answer for us to slow down the trafficking of firearms to Mexico? How do we do this without, affecting the rights of United States citizens who are just purchasing guns? How do we do this in a way that's effective and doesn't, step on anyone's Second Amendment right? And how do we do this to protect, these innocent Mexicans out there in Mexico who are at risk at all times because of the cartels battling and fighting over with U.S. weapons? What's the answer for this?
It's complex. But like I said before, one of the ways is when you catch people who the dealers are calling you saying, hey, man, something suspicious is going on here. And you catch them and they confess, yeah, I'm not buying the gun for me. I was buying it for somebody. And yeah, I know they're bringing it to Mexico. Prosecute them. I can tell you there was a recent case in Phoenix where a woman walked into a dealer with over $100,000 in cash. She was unemployed. She was buying Barrett rifles and belt-fed rifles as well. And the U.S. Attorney's Office was punting. They didn't want to take the case. I mean, she admittedly was bringing guns down to Mexico to the cartels, barracks again, and belt-fed rifles. So, I mean, if you're not going to prosecute people where there's no deterrence, people are going to do stupid things. That's number one. Number two is, look, the Mexican government does not do, like I said earlier, they don't do a very good job of stopping cars going south. We stop stuff coming north all the time, and things still get through. I understand that. But, I mean, if the aduana is not going to be held to account or trained better or better armed or whatever, then, that's another area that needs to improve. But I mean, those two things alone would have a significant impact on the number of weapons making their way into Mexico. Now, here's the other thing too. Truth. People need to start speaking the truth, because I know that there's some discussions here that about 1 million guns a year being smuggled into Mexico. That's the anti-Second Amendment crowd who don't want people to have guns, making a lot of noise. There is no way it's 1 million a year. I talk to people in ATF. I talk to people on the Mexican side of the border that work for ATF, and they believe the number's maybe 250,000, maybe a little bit more, but that million number is grossly exaggerated, and that's to make the gun look bad and not necessarily portray the trafficker as the problem.
Interesting. I've never thought of that. Yeah, I could see that number be exaggerated. What's interesting is that we had someone on here that she was part of a reporter that broke a story of a small city. I forget which town it was in. I think it was Indiana or something, or Wisconsin. That's what I think it was, Wisconsin. But just in that town alone, they sold almost 8 different Barrett rifles and little small guns. And then eventually you got like, man, there's a lot of Barrett rifles being bought in this little town, and they identified it. Obviously, eventually, the whole ring of it kind of was uncovered. But from my experience, just Barrett rifles, those don't get used as much as like an AR platform does, right? A Barrett is more of it's a long distance thing. It's not as effective as like an AR platform in certain things. So as long as these Barrett rifles are getting purchased, to me, I don't know if there's much of a threat, in my opinion, I mean, again, a Barrett rifle is dangerous no matter what, but I'm always concerned more about the AR platforms, the AK-47s, because it's just a casualty producing weapon at a high rate, and it can be used by anyone and pretty effective, whoever's pulling that trigger. And so that's more of the concern for me.
The cartels, they're certainly, I mean, the AKs, their weapon of choice. They like the AR-15 as well. They are looking for the Barretts. Because again, like you look at CJNG, they're riding around those armored vehicles. They can utilize the Barrett. In fact, I know that one of the Barrett rifles that was smuggled during the Fast and Furious case was, again, straw purchaser. In fact, this funny story. It's not funny, actually. One of the straw purchasers in Operation Fast and Furious bought over 800 firearms. Not in one shot, obviously, before the U.S. Attorney's Office felt that he was worthy of indicting. But one of those Barrett rifles that was involved in that case was used to shoot down a Mexican, I'm not sure if it was military or a police helicopter, but there were fatalities. Yes. Yeah, so I mean, so they are using the Barrett, but I agree with you. Look, it's not a close quarter combat weapon. It's not something that's easy to handle. It's you got to basically be in a sniper perch to use that weapon. But they're seeking them, and the thing is, the Barrett sells for $7,500 and up here. So a straw purchaser buying a Barrett might make $1,000, $2,000, right, for lying on that form and handing that gun over. But in Mexico, that gun is selling for $50,000, $60,000 because the cartels have bottomless pockets, man. So they're not afraid to throw money around. And so that's why straw purchasing is a problem, is because the purchasers are making a little bit of money. They know they're not going to get prosecuted. So until people start going to jail for lying on that form and handing guns over to traffickers, it's just going to continue. And the problem is not every U.S. attorney's office, and this already, not every U.S. attorney's office wants to prosecute these cases. And look, some of them don't want to prosecute any cases. Some of them are just flat out lazy. Let's just call it what it is.
Yeah. What's the process of buying a rifle? What part of the ATF has an involvement in people purchasing rifles? Is there anything at all?
Well, look, you can buy a rifle. You can buy several rifles. The thing that happened is and this is one of the things that I think actually helped drive Operation Fast and Furious on the political side, why the White House and everybody was the Obama White House was kind of not holding anybody accountable. If you go into a gun store in, let's say, Nevada, you can walk in and you could say, I want all the AK-47 variant rifles you have. I want all your Barretts. And if the people have the money, the dealer's probably going to call ATF. That's where ATF would get involved. But technically, you can buy all of those weapons, and there was no multiple sale form that had to be filled out. Like if you buy 2 handguns in any state, the dealer has to fill out that form. Because of Fast and Furious, they came out with this thing called Demand Letter Number 3, where the border states, if you go into a border state FFL and buy more than one rifle, that form gets filled out. So ATF might find out that you bought more than one rifle. Doesn't mean they can investigate you if it's not suspicious. So that's where ATF would get involved. If you buy more than one rifle in a border state, they're going to get notified. If it looks suspicious, they may come knock on your door. And if it's legit, then, hey, have a nice day, enjoy your shooting, whatever. Or if the guns get traced, sometimes that's the thing people forget. Straw purchasing is an act of deception, right? So if the dealers saw something suspicious, they would always call us without fail. While I was in Arizona, they called us. But if I'm sly and I don't show anything that looks like I'm going to hand that gun off to somebody, well, the dealer's not going to know. He's going to sell me that gun, and then ATF wouldn't get involved until that gun gets traced. Now, the problem, like in the U.S., when guns get traced, it can be traced after a car stop where the locals pull up a gun. They want to find out where it came from, or during a search warrant. The police aren't very proactive in Mexico, as you can imagine. So when those guns are being recovered in Mexico, they're more often than not being recovered next to a dead body. Again, sometimes it's a cartel body, sometimes it's a Mexican soldier, Mexican Marine, Mexican cop, or some kid. So, that's where ATF would get involved. That notification on a multiple sale, a call from the dealer, or when the gun is found at a crime scene.
Got it. So I want to circle back to Project Thor real quick. What was making Project Thor so successful?
Well, I think it's like we said before, man, to get everybody to play in the sandbox is big. And then, look, DEA, their Special Operations Division, is a well-oiled machine. So, to have them cooperating, because they sometimes have access to cell phone exploitation. They know who's calling who sometimes. They also sometimes could track emails and other communications. That intelligence is critical. So my understanding is Project Thor, above all other programs, utilize that intelligence proactively and aggressively. Once that interagency cooperation goes away, then, as you know, it just gets harder. When the people aren't cooperating, talking to each other, you're not exploiting that intelligence, developing more intelligence, it's harder to put the puzzle pieces together.
Yeah, this is something that we're going to probably dig in deeper with this podcast and try and figure out. I can't understand why a project like this would do well and then get defunded. It doesn't make sense to me. And there's a million other things that could probably be defunded, but something who's actually effective. The only thing I can say, and I don't want to play in this conspiracy theory world too much, but when you stop something that's that effective, you've pissed someone off enough that it's gone high enough the chain of command that it's like, okay, we need to stop pissing these people off. And am I wrong in saying that? Do you ever dabble in the idea that maybe the government is tied into this at some point where you've pissed the wrong person off and now we have to cut the funding?
Well, again, I'll go back to what I said earlier. I just am really puzzled, almost pissed off by the timing of this thing getting shut down around the same time as the Mexico lawsuit. And again, I know from speaking to someone who was assigned to the Mexico office that Salazar, who took a completely different posture than Landau, his predecessor. Landau liked this project, thought it was great. And then Salazar comes in and doesn't like it. So why didn't he like it? Was he talking to someone who's know what the government of Mexico was going to do with the lawsuit? Was it causing him headaches? Because, look, it doesn't help when the cartel people are getting arrested up here because maybe it looks like we're targeting our neighbor from the south. The problem is that there are people that live, down in our neighboring country. And I love Mexico, love the Mexican people, been down here many times. But the cartel is a problem. They're a cancer. And look, they've turned a beautiful country full of warm, God-fearing people into a failed narco state. So, who benefits? That's the question, is who benefits? Again, the lawsuit, though, the timing for me is incredibly problematic. Plus the connection to the White House Office of Gun Violence Prevention, which has now been disbanded and sent out the door.
Why is that?
Because Trump didn't believe it should have been part of the government. And most people who believe in the Second Amendment would agree. Some of the stuff they were doing, like, for example, they forced ATF to send out the name and shame list, which listed the high-profile dealers whose guns most get recovered. Cabela's was one of them. The D.C. Metro Police Department, which had an FFL to issue guns to its officers, was listed as one of these dealers. But here's the reality. If you're a large volume dealer, right, you're going to have traces come back to you. It doesn't mean that you're selling guns to bad people. If you sell a gun to me and I go to the gym and stupidly leave my gun in my car and it's not locked up and some tweaker comes in and steals it and it gets traced to a crime scene, it's going to come back not to Pete. It's going to come back to that dealer when you use the FFL as the bellwether. So, that's part of the problem. So, that was something that was pushed. And then the zero tolerance policy was something that came down from the White House, pressure on ATF. So, during my entire 20 years with ATF, they didn't have that sort of contact with the White House. At most, they dealt with the Attorney General's office. Maybe if something major happened, someone from ATF would go brief the White House, but there wasn't this constant contact like they had between Steve Dettelbach and the Office of White House Gun Violence Prevention. That's just not something that happened.
Yeah, it sounds like it got defunded because it's success. Almost. That's what it starts to feel like.
Yeah.
Man. Well, if you don't mind, tell the audience where they can check out your book one more time, just so we can kind of give you some love on that.
Yeah, no, thanks. Yeah, it's it's called The Deadly Path. I'll get a copy of it here. It's how Operation Fast and Furious and bad lawyers armed Mexican cartels. It's on Amazon, and signed copies you can get at my website. It's www.peterjforcelli.com. Thanks for letting me plug the book.
I appreciate your time, man.
Anytime.
Always.
Yeah, it's good seeing you, brother.
Absolutely, brother. Thank you for listening to Borderland Narcosis, an Ironclad original. Don't forget to check out your supplements at firstform.com/Borderland. And if you like the swag, go check out a Narcosis hoodie.